webinar. Now we're going to start our webinar off a little bit differently than normal. Green America produced an introduction video on the issue of refrigerants a couple years ago. So we're going to start with a viewing of that to just give you a nice overview of this issue, why it's important, and why it has continued to be one of Green America's focus areas. Okay, I think I'm sharing, and let me just make sure the audio is also going to share. And Dan and Beth, once I go ahead and start this, if you just let me know if you can't hear it, because I'm sure our other folks on the call will have the same experience. So just give me a heads up if the audio is not comprehensible.
The temperature of our planet has risen almost a full degree Celsius in the last 100 years. We all know we need to act fast. The good news? There's one thing we can eliminate, which could keep the global temperature from rising by half a degree. Want to guess what? Reduced meat consumption is a great idea, but not what we're talking about. Reducing carbon emissions is also essential, but there's something else. It's in your neighborhood supermarket. It's this refrigerator. Actually, it's the gas that's used as refrigerant to make this fridge cold. Refrigerants are in all refrigerators, freezers, and air conditioners. So what's the problem? The substances most often used as refrigerants are called hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs. And to put it bluntly, HFCs are really, really bad for the climate. We're talking thousands of times more powerful than CO2 in terms of climate change. And even worse, HFCs leak out of refrigeration systems that aren't well maintained. A typical supermarket could leak a quarter of its refrigerant every year due to faulty systems. And if a broken system isn't fixed or disposed of in a responsible way, those HFCs can all be released. HFCs from refrigerators are one of the most dangerous contributors to our climate crisis, and why we can't ignore HFCs, even as we reduce our carbon emissions. So what do we do about it? Safer, smarter refrigeration systems exist, but stores won't change without pressure from customers like you. So join us today in holding companies accountable. Visit Green America's website to learn more about HFCs and take action today, because it's not too late to tell supermarkets to cool it.
So I think that's a really great introduction to this topic, but now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Beth and Dan to talk a little bit more about the issue of refrigerants and, all of the updates that have happened since we produced this video a couple years ago.
Hey everybody, my name is Dan Howells. I'm the Climate Campaigns Director at Green America, and I'm going to let Beth introduce herself here in a second. But one of the key things from that video I wanted to point out was the 0.5 degrees. So estimates are, if we take care of, I think most folks will know, we're trying to keep the increase in the temperature of the climate from going over 1.5 degrees. 0.5 degrees of that, if we take care of the HFC problem or issue, will be taken care of. So it's a huge step, and it's a big reason for why we're working on hydrofluorocarbons and trying to pressure grocery stores like Kroger's to make the switch out. But with that, I'll turn it over to Beth to introduce herself and talk a little bit about the progress as well that has been made thus far.
Thank you, Dan. I'm Beth, she, her pronouns, and I'm so happy to be here today with my friends at Green America and all of you lovely folks. In case you aren't familiar, I work at the Environmental Investigation Agency, or EIA, and we're an independent organization that is dedicated to identifying, investigating, and implementing solutions that protect endangered wildlife, forests, and our global climate. So EIA has been closely involved in international and domestic ozone and climate negotiations on fluorinated refrigerants, F gases, as we like to say, for more than 2 decades. And we've been so glad to have this partnership between Green America and EIA working on getting food retailers to reduce HFC emissions and use better practices. So we've seen some good progress in the area, as Dan mentioned, but obviously there's still much more work to be done. But we'll kick it off with focusing on some of the progress we've seen in our campaigns. So major retailer in the space, I'm sure you're all familiar with Walmart's huge footprint. For many years, we've been engaging with Walmart and urging progress on this issue. And for over a decade, the company has made public statements about its refrigerant management. However, its HFC emissions continued to increase steadily over that same time period. So this led Green America and EIA to team up to launch a new public campaign in 2019. And 100,000 people, more than 100,000 people signed our digital action. Some of you folks may have signed it. If you did, thank you so much. And we continued to amp up the public pressure, social media pressure to call Walmart's attention to this big issue. And then, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. I'm back now. So the company finally set a goal in 2020 to set to low impact refrigerants by 2040. However, that's a 2-decade timeline, and low impact refrigerants does not hold a lot of meaning if you don't define it by what you're going to transition to, right? And this timeline like details about how the company would actually take action to execute and meet its goal. So we kept up the campaign, calling on Walmart, and we even partnered with investors to launch the first ever shareholder resolution on refrigerants, which was so huge in 2021. And then since then, we've actually seen Walmart start to take actual steps, not just words, around its HFCs. So Walmart has opened its first HFC-free store in the country, which is a good step in the right direction. Although, as you know, Walmart's footprint is large and there's many more stores that they need to address. They've also committed for all new store construction to use ultra low global warming potential refrigerants where feasible. So another good step in the right direction. And on the policy level, Walmart has actually engaged and supported stronger HFC regulations to the EPA, which is good. So we're seeing a company kind of like moving past the empty words into implementing that HFC-free technology and advocating using their influence at the policy level. So that's some progress. But we also want to acknowledge that this company still has a target to move away from HFCs by 2040. It's a very long timeline. So we're continuing to push Walmart to accelerate that timeline and to amp up its refrigerant management and disclosure about how it can improve on reducing these HFC emissions in their stores today. So I'm going to pass it back to Dan to talk about another campaign victory.
Well, most recently, thanks, Beth. And most recently, in fact, I believe, if I remember correctly, it was in January, Trader Joe's quietly put on their website, I think it was a blog, if I remember correctly, that they, like Walmart and all of their new stores, have committed to using low global warming potential refrigerants in all their new stores, which is great. Trader Joe's is notoriously reluctant to do a lot to react to a campaign pressure from really just any organization. So it was great that they made the announcement, but like Beth was pointing out with Walmart, Trader Joe's has a long ways to go. Their footprint isn't as big as Walmart, but there are a lot of Trader Joe's all around the states. And so we'll continue to work with them and try and pressure them as well to switch out their old footprint. But we were very encouraged to see that they were acknowledging the issue and at least making the changes in their new stores. And I think with that, we're going to go back to Beth to talk a bit more about some of the policy work issues that are coming about that's really going to force a lot of these grocery store chains to make the change one way or another.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. I will share my screen. Got a couple of slides here for you all. And oh my goodness. Okay. Slideshow from beginning. All right. How's that look? We good, Dan? All right, thank you. So much of the work that we're talking about today and we'll focus on later in the presentation is on corporate accountability, right? However, there's a lot of important policy action that's been happening on HFCs. And that adds another essential pressure point to pushing companies even beyond supermarkets to move forward on how they deal with their cooling emissions. So I want to give a very high level overview of some of the big policy moves that we've been seeing. And you can find a lot more details if you are a really into being a policy nerd like myself. You can find more details on EA's website about all of these different initiatives. So we'll kick it off with the Kigali Amendments. So some of you may be familiar with CFCs. I think I even saw in the chat someone mentioned CFCs or chlorofluorocarbons. Those are substances that were used in cooling and aerosols, but became under really heavy scrutiny in the 80s and 90s because they were wreaking absolute havoc on the ozone layer. So the Montreal Protocol is the global agreement that was formed to phase out CFCs, and that was established in 1988. So since then, as CFC markets declined, the alternative that popped up were HFCs, which is what we're really here to talk about today, those hydrofluorocarbons. So HFCs don't harm the ozone layer as CFCs do, but they have extremely high global warming potential, which is why they are so damaging to our climate, as we saw in the Cool It video. So to tackle HFCs, the Kigali Amendment under the Montreal Protocol was introduced in 2016. And since then, 148 countries have ratified this amendment. Kigali is a phase down of HFCs by 85% by 2036, and the US Senate finally ratified Kigali just last year, which is great news. So the AIM Act, we're moving to the US federal level now. In 2020, at the very end of 2020, Congress in the US passed the American Innovation in Manufacturing, or AIM Act. And this act directs the EPA to address HFCs in phasing them down in alignment with the timeline outlined by the Kigali Amendment, right? So this is sort of our federal US specific regulations around how we are going to meet the targets of the Kigali Amendment. And the EPA is empowered to address these by phasing down production and use of HFCs, maximizing their reclamation so we can reduce the need for newer HFCs while those alternatives are growing in markets, and also facilitating the transition to those alternatives, which we'll go into in a little bit. And I also want to mention that another great thing that has been done under the Biden administration is the development of the Interagency Task Force on Illegal HFC Trade. So the EPA is implementing several measures under the AIM Act to prevent illegal trade, which is crucial because when we saw a phase out of CFCs, illegal trade of CFCs skyrocketed. So taking some really key lessons learned from that process, bringing that into the AIM Act to work to reduce the potential for illegal trade of HFCs so that we can really see those climate benefits realized by curbing those emissions. And so the last policy slide we have here is on the state level. So there have been states that have shown great leadership on tackling HFCs, and there's plenty of opportunity for more action at the local level to curb these emissions. But the leading states include California, Washington, and New York. So there are a lot of examples that we could point to here in state leadership, but I want to use a recent California example, SB 1206, which passed and is the first regulation in the US to ban many HFCs in new equipment and require climate-friendly alternatives. So that's transitioning away from HFCs by 2035 to those ultra-low GWP alternatives. Which is great. And those alternatives are on the market. They are proven to be successful and can even show energy efficiency benefits, which are excellent. So California is really ramping up the implementation of those. Also, this impacts work on supermarkets specifically because companies will only be permitted to purchase systems using refrigerants with a 150 GWP or less. So that's considerably lower than the GWPs we were talking about in the video in the thousands. But when we talk about ultra low, we're talking about less than 10. We're talking about zero or near zero climate impact. So we're progressively trying to get those GWPs down in all applications that we can. So we're also glad to see that California is incorporating EIA's proposal to jumpstart a new refrigerant recovery program that will reduce end-of-life emissions. And those end of life emissions are huge. So the large steps that we've been talking about to phase down HFCs are hugely important to, quote, turn off the tap of HFCs flooding into our cooling systems. But what about the emissions from existing equipment? And that is where life cycle refrigerant management comes in. EIA has worked with other partners to outline in a report how managing refrigerants throughout their life cycles, not just at the start, but the maintenance and the responsible disposal, can avoid up to 91 billion tons of CO2 equivalent emissions. So it's a huge benefit in addition to the emissions reductions we'll see by phasing out HFCs, phasing down HFCs over the next 15 years. So this just shows how many more actions there are for companies and governments to take today. They can start reducing these harmful emissions now with these key actions. So the report goes into a lot greater detail, as you may imagine, but I do just want to share the 6 key pillars that we focus on in the report of responsible life cycle refrigerant management. And that's responsible product stewardship. So getting chemical producers and equipment manufacturers to support that circular economy, really getting those appliances and substances back to responsibly manage those, recover, reclaim, and reuse refrigerants. Reducing leaks, something that we'll talk about in our corporate accountability piece next. Stronger reporting and enforcement. Transparency is key. We have to be able to ensure that the reporting, servicing, and disposal requirements on companies are strong and that they push for the best practices across the sector. So we're reducing those emissions at end of life. Additionally, supporting a strong, well-trained EPA certified workforce in the latest best practices and properly installing and servicing that equipment. So what does all this have to do with your local supermarket? So much. So food retailers are major users of refrigerant, as you can imagine. We're talking air conditioning, we're talking freezers, refrigeration, all of that. Supermarkets use a lot of refrigerant, and they have these huge systems that are prone to leaks. On average, these emissions account for over half of a food retailer's direct greenhouse gas emissions. And as you saw in the video, the EPA reports that a quarter, 25% of an average supermarket's refrigerant leaks out each year. So this really adds up when you compound that across all of the supermarkets across the country. We have estimated that refrigerant leaks lead to the emissions equivalent of 49 billion pounds of coal being burned each year. So these are significant impacts. So who is leaking what and how much, and how do we find out? As I mentioned before, a key strategy for EIA is our investigations. It is in the name of our organization. So EIA went to supermarkets across the DC region to investigate which stores were leaking refrigerant, and we produced a report of these findings called Leaking Havoc. And I will pass it over to Tyler to share this brief video, taking a little break from the slides here.
There is something lurking in your local supermarket. Invisible gases that destroy our climate are leaking from these refrigerated aisles. Using high-tech equipment, EIA investigated Walmart and other major supermarkets to reveal this massive problem, hidden in plain sight. Hydrofluorocarbons, or HFCs, are invisible greenhouse gases that are used to cool our food, and supermarkets use a ton of them. The problem is supermarkets are incredibly prone to leaking HFCs, which are thousands of times worse for the climate than carbon dioxide. In the United States, the average supermarket leaks hundreds of pounds of HFCs in a single year. These disruptive emissions are especially frustrating because they are easily detected and could easily be avoided. Equipped with portable HFC leak detectors and an optical gas imaging camera, we searched for HFC leaks in supermarkets in the Washington, D.C. metropolitan area. By using a specialized infrared camera, we were actually able to see these otherwise invisible superpollutants. What the camera revealed in the dairy aisle of a giant grocery store was alarming. What looks like black smoke is actually HFC gases spilling into the air. This particular HFC has a global warming potential about 4,000 times worse than CO2. This is the first time that a display floor refrigerant leak has been caught on camera, bringing this invisible climate killer into plain view. Using industry-accepted leak detectors, we investigated every refrigerator and freezer in the stores we visited. When the meter read at least 2 parts per million, we knew there was a leak in the store. At one Walmart location, the detector's readings spiked to 182 parts per million. 2 months later, we detected a leak in the same location. This suggests that superpollutants had been spewing into the atmosphere the entire time. Altogether, we visited 45 stores, and over half had a measurable leak. However, because the majority of the refrigerant in supermarkets leaks from areas we couldn't access as regular customers, the problem is likely much worse. Supermarkets must control these leaking superpollutants and move to HFC-free technology as soon as possible for the sake of our climate.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm going to just bring my PowerPoint back. Okay. Yes, current slide. Great. Thanks so much for sharing that video, Tyler. So you got to see in kind of how our investigation into supermarkets went. As the video outlined, we found leaks in over 60% of Walmart stores that we investigated, really shining that particular spotlight on how this large retailer had these ongoing leaks over a series of months. And over half of all the companies that the stores, all of the stores that were visited were measurably leaking. So it's a significant problem, showing that it's not one company, it is a systemic sector-wide issue that we are calling attention to. And as the video emphasized, these findings kind of scratch the surface, tip of the iceberg, so to speak, because there are areas within the supermarket that the investigators could not access that possibly had significantly higher leaks. So it's a major issue. So I'm guessing many of you might be wondering how the different companies and maybe even your local supermarket stack up on this particular issue. So we'll include a link to this and other resources I've mentioned, I think, in the follow-up email, thanks to Tyler. But this is EIA's supermarket scorecard. We look at the largest food retailers in the US and compile responses from companies, emissions reports, news articles, anything we can to assess the company in 3 key areas. And that is how well they're doing at adopting HFC-free systems and technology in their stores. Are they managing their refrigerants well? Are they following their leak rates? Are they repairing them promptly? Do they report low average leak rates? That sort of thing. And have they set meaningful commitments to address these emissions? What policy engagement are they showing? And beyond just, you know, a vague blog post once a year, are they actually disclosing and keeping their word, meeting those commitments and showing progress as they move along their timelines? So the first version of this scorecard was released in 2020, and we released this version updated this year. And on our website, you can drop down each company name and you can see a bit more details on how they were graded and what actions we're urging them to do to improve their grade. As you might see at the top, we have Aldi, and Aldi and Whole Foods are the only 2 companies on the scorecard right now that rise above 50%. So even though we've seen some movement upwards from a lot of companies in the last 2 years, they still haven't yet joined the ranks of who I would call kind of our leader in the industry. Aldi has been an early adopter and a strong implementer of HFC-free technology. So there's still plenty of work to do in this sector. So I will pass it back to Dan now.
Thanks, Beth. You know, that's always enlightening. So a couple of things that Beth talked about, and I'll highlight for you, is the ask of the campaign and the work is that they switch grocery store chains across the country, switch to lower greenhouse gas polluting refrigeration systems, and that's going to take a while. It's expensive. You have to shut stores down for a short period of time. There's issues why it's going to take a while, but they still need to do it. The regulations are coming, as Beth pointed out. So one way or another, to be compliant and to help the planet, they're going to have to switch to lower global warming potential refrigerants. In the meantime, they need to take care of the leaks. So taking care of the leaks is going to help reduce the pollution. It's going to save them money because they're not having to use as much. And so there's lots of reasons for the different grocery store chains to do it. So currently, Green America and EIA and other colleagues are concentrating on Kroger's. I'm from the Midwest. I live in California now, but I'm from the Midwest, so Kroger's is everywhere. Kroger's also has something like 20 other brands underneath the Kroger banner. So out here in California, Safeway. A lot of you may have heard about that Albertsons and Kroger's are trying to go through a merger right now. And so Kroger's national footprint as a business is huge. And their footprint as greenhouse or on global warming, mostly because of HFCs, is also huge. So we've been targeting Kroger, and I've been at Green America for a year, and I'll let Beth talk a bit more about what may have happened before I got here. But last June, Kroger's had their annual general meeting, and working with EIA and all of you, frankly, we submitted, it was between 10 and 12,000 comments to, maybe I think it was 13,000 comments to Kroger's, asking them to take action on HFCs. At the same time, working with another partner that filed a shareholder resolution for the first time at Kroger's. Normally the shareholder resolutions get on their first time out maybe between 1% and 5% of the shareholders supporting whatever action they're being asked to take. And I'm trying to remember, Beth, this time for Kroger's, the first time out on this resolution, it was around 35%.
Yeah, 35% of voting shareholders.
Which is huge, because that's a huge recognition of Kroger's is responsible to their customers, to their communities, but also to their shareholders. And to have that many shareholders come out and support Kroger taking action on HFCs is a big deal. I'm telling you, we just found out yesterday that the shareholder meeting, annual general meeting for Kroger's is coming up on June 22nd. And there's not going to be a shareholder resolution this year. If they don't start acting, we'll probably do another one next year. But in the meantime, we're going to continue working with all of you, members of Green America and activists around the country, to keep putting pressure on Kroger's. They came out with what they called their climate
roadmap.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Climate roadmap. I think it was in January of this year, and it was woefully inadequate. There was maybe 2 or 3 bullet points on regarding HFCs, and the detail was nowhere. The action is nowhere, and so we're going to keep putting pressure on Kroger until they actually take action. And so be looking from us and from EIA, lots of social media, lots of ways to communicate to the company that it's important that they take a leadership role on this instead of being recalcitrant on the issue. And hopefully they can move up EIA's scorecard in the very near future by taking real actions. But I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, that's such a great overview, Dan. And I think, the interesting thing that I remember about Kroger's climate roadmap, which was really kind of built up for a long time. It was just like, don't worry, the roadmap's going to have refrigerants in it. It's all good. And then we saw it. It's just very lacking in detail in those particular actions, and not strong commitments, not time-bound commitments, anything that we would consider to be kind of like a meaningful commitment, right? Time-bound details, how they're going to implement this, and how they will report progress over time to the public. And so we're not seeing a lot of that. And particularly around the emissions issue, I believe their projected emissions for refrigerants were going to keep rising and then just plateau. They're not really looking at ways to decrease those emissions aggressively, from what we could tell in the climate roadmap. So I'm going based off of the publicly available information here. But it is concerning that a company of this size, particularly one that is in the midst of trying to acquire, merge with, et cetera, other companies, and will have more stores under their purview, to have kind of a vague plan. And so that's why we keep pushing on Kroger. And just like Dan said, there will be a lot of ways to take action. Should I share another way for folks to get involved, Dan? Maybe the map. All right. Going back to my beautiful PowerPoints here. All right. Here we go. Cool. So this is the climate friendly supermarkets map. This is EIA's map. You can see it is global. Obviously, we've had a lot of participation in North America, really, really encouraging folks to share with friends, family, everyone, anyone who's all over the world. If they are near a supermarket, we want to hear about it. So this is populated by crowdsourced information, which is pretty incredible. So this has submissions from folks who go into their local supermarket, find a refrigerant label, take a picture and email it to us. And then we're able to identify what type of refrigerant they're using and can add them to the map to show if they are HFC free, if they're using some climate friendly refrigerants, or if they are only using HFCs, which are the stores in red. So you can see here that it's a quick and easy way to get involved. Once you've signed our petition, which I highly encourage you to check it out. And this goes beyond the list of companies that we have on our supermarket scorecard. So all grocery stores, supermarkets, convenience stores, everything welcome for this map. So it's a quick and easy way to investigate, as we would call it, our citizen investigators. And we outline the steps. It's like 4 key steps on our webpage, which we'll share in the follow-up email. But it's really as simple as walking in. Oh, I'm looking in this refrigerated area. Oh, I'll take a picture of this and email it into us. And that is really all you have to do to get added to the map. And we have been so appreciative of thousands of folks who have been submitting refrigerant labels and have helped really populate this map. It's a great way to get involved. It raises attention to the issue, and it helps us to really hold these companies accountable by having on the ground information of what's going on in their stores. So it's, I think, a really interesting and helpful resources, and a very, it's a really great way for folks to get involved in this issue on a casual trip to your supermarket. So it's very easy to take action with us on this.
And I would just add to that, most of the folks in the stores, because I've gone and looked at labels, and hardly anybody pays attention to you. So if you have any hesitancy about, are they going to talk to me? Are they going to say anything? 9 times out of 10, they're not even going to notice you. I was digging around in a Trader Joe's refrigeration system, and it's an open system, so I'm like pulling stuff out of there, and I was doing that for about 15-20 minutes, and not one staff person looked at me. So if you have any apprehension about it, and if somebody approaches you, just say, oh no, I was just looking, and then there's no reason to confront them. There's no reason to really say much more than, no, just looking, thanks, and move along. So become a citizen investigator and help really populate the map.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's such a cool way. And it's been awesome to see how people get very excited about taking action. We've got some folks who that is like their thing when they're on a trip or whatever, they're really passionate about sending in this information and helping us to really populate this map. Some people get like, their community groups, like friends, family, like there's families who dress up into costume and go to do it. Like it's, can become a really interesting way to engage people, to make this what's often considered kind of an invisible issue, right? The greenhouse gases, we can't see them with our eyes, but it helps make it visible. It helps give you some sort of like physical context, right, of what we're talking about and the sources of these emissions in these stores. So can't speak highly enough about the CFS map, and encourage you all to get involved. And I think that is it for me. Dan, did you have anything else before we
Specifically on
move to
Kroger,
questions?
and then we
Yeah.
can go to questions, but specifically on Kroger's, thank you all for all of you who have taken action. We know they're feeling the pressure. I have a feeling because of the merger, they're moving maybe a little slower than they might normally have. But over the next month, look for action alerts, social media, all kinds of different ways for us to communicate with the company. And the more that all of you do what you've done, a lot of you have already done in the past, make comments to the company, but the more you help echo the messages to the company, especially going into their shareholder meeting when they felt so much pressure last year, and they're going to continue to feel pressure. And on top of that, they're under pressure from the merger as well. There's lots going on with that. So just look for the social media and just help us do more and more outreach, get your friends, family, cousins, whomever involved, and just really let them know that, consumers care about these issues. And if they know that consumers care about these issues, they're going to care about the issues even more. So just help us make that happen, and appreciate everything all of you have already done.
Well said, Dan. I think we're good to go to questions, Tyler, if we've got any questions.
Yeah, we do. Just a second, I'll pull them up. So Larry G in the chat actually asked, where are these leaks coming from?
Yeah, so you can see in the video, or the investigation video, where we put the what we call the probe, where we can assess if a leak is present or not. It's right sort of where the grates are in the, I'm thinking about like what areas of a supermarket the public interacts with, right? Like it's right kind of like in the ventilation and like the grates in those freezer areas. So that gives kind of like a good sense of like where exactly in the store display they're coming from. If it's an open case display, you might see those on top. Also in the video, we showed kind of like we used the IR camera to show the HFCs coming out from the top. So a couple different points where emissions can occur, wherever there's a lack of maintenance or faulty equipment happening. That's where you can potentially see a leak.
And Isadora asked in the chat whether these HFCs are dangerous for humans to breathe in.
Dan, do you want to take? Sorry, I don't want to.
No, go for it. Go for it.
Okay, yeah. So they are not. So if you're walking around your store, you are not in danger. I just want to emphasize that. They are not immediately toxic to humans. Where we see their concern, and we could say they are harmful to the public health, is in their impacts on the climate, right? So it's not a present danger in stores for folks, but obviously very, very potent and strong actors on climate change.
Yeah, and then Reka just asked in the chat if open frozen storage systems are better than those in Trader Joe's or ones with doors. Just, the functionality of how these refrigeration system or freezer systems are contained, whether that makes an impact on leak rates and such.
I don't think it doesn't make a leak as a leak, right? So if it's coming out, whether it's open or closed, you can sometimes walk into a store and that you'll just not even near the refrigeration systems, and you can pick up that there are HFC leaks, whether that's the open system as you asked about Trader Joe's or otherwise. But a leak is a leak, and they're all using HFCs, and so sometimes maybe the HFCs are caught up a little bit more in the closed door, but all it takes is a
once
customer.
They're opened.
Yeah, once those doors are open, those leaks are out, and frankly, they're out anyway. So, but there's my sense is the closed door ones are more efficient.
I think for energy efficiency, yes, that is where I think the doors, or even some sort of, even if it's sort of like a vinyl cover, something that is helping to keep the cool air in the equipment, is more efficient than an open air system.
But HFC wise, it's like I said, it's a leak is a leak, and if it's happening, it's happening, and they have
a leak is a leak. We should make that the name of something. A poem. A leak is a leak. A haiku about refrigerant.
There you go.
Yeah, but yeah, well said.
And Beth, in your presentation, you talked a little bit about the fact that alternatives to HFCs are accessible and they're proven to be effective. But we had a question from Paula, and both Paula and Isadora, about what are some of the cost-efficient alternatives to HFCs?
Yeah, so the main, when we talk about, we've thrown around GWP a lot. So the ultra low GWP is what we're really advocating for. That's zero or near zero global warming impact refrigerants. And those include CO2, which is a GWP of 1. And in this particular application is more climate friendly than the HFC alternative. Hydrocarbons, ammonia in some, like in ice skating rinks, for example, that's a commonly used refrigerant that has minimal climate impact. So those are some examples of kind of key, what we would call natural refrigerants, and that have minimal climate impacts. And in terms of the cost, it's I think very case by case basis, but to pull out an existing system and put in a new system, there is a cost barrier to that. And that's why we're really urging companies to set a transition time for all locations, but to immediately set a commitment to all new stores and retrofits to be HFC free. Because if you're putting in a new store, the costs are pretty comparable in terms of an HFC or an HFC free system. And that's also why we're pushing on kind of the other areas that emissions can come from, like refrigerant management, things like that, because we do understand and we are very, I think, hopefully grounded about the realities that supermarkets, retailers, businesses are facing in terms of replacing those systems. But it's a really, kind of low-hanging fruit to commit to all new systems being HFC free and really adopting that. And there are great examples of how this has been successfully used. Aldi is a great example if we're talking about different geographic areas. I know Publix has had great success with using ultra low GWP even in a warm, hot climate. And so these are some examples of showing that it can be done in all different parts of the US.
We had a lot of questions both ahead of the webinar and then during today's webinar about, specific supermarkets. And I'm wondering to just kind of answer this question broadly instead of getting into every single supermarket chain. I wonder if you can touch on how people on this call and people who are watching this recording at a later date can vet their own local supermarkets regarding greenhouse gas emissions, HFCs in particular, or even other things like animal welfare policies.
Well, and Beth and I talked a little bit about this earlier. So there's a difference between your local co-op and a Walmart or a Kroger's. You should feel free to go in and talk to anyone in the stores. I would try and talk to a manager because most of the times, the clerks are busy doing their thing, and probably if you said HFCs to them, they wouldn't really know what you were talking about. But I going in and chatting with your local co-op is a perfectly fine thing to do. And I would start with, hey, what kind of HFC or what kind of refrigerants are you using? It's most likely going to be an HFC, unless it's a brand new store. Most likely going to be HFCs, and then talk to them about their leak detection and what are they doing about leaks, and do they have any plans to switch those out to lower global warming potential. So it's good to have those conversations, but we also want to point out that there's a big difference between the footprint of your local co-op and the footprint of Kroger's. Kroger has 2,800 stores across the country under all its names. And so getting the big ones to act first is of the utmost importance. It doesn't mean that everybody shouldn't be taking care of the issue. But you should also feel free to go to your Kroger's or Safeways or Albertsons or whatever it is and say, hey, what kind of refrigerants are you using? Are you doing anything about the leaks? Have you even checked if leaks are happening? What are your plans? So you can always go in and have those conversations. Or if you're not comfortable having those conversations, you can write a letter and take it into them. With our last action that we did on Kroger's, we actually had, and some of you probably remember this because you probably did it, we had people go to their customer service website or the web page and put comments in there, and we actually got a lot of responses. Some of those, yes, are bots, but we could also tell that some of those were real people. So whatever the store is, whether it be your local one or a big one, it could even Walmart, go in and have those conversations and ask for the manager and just ask them what they're doing about HFCs and taking care of the refrigerant systems. And Beth, I don't know if you got anything to add to that.
Yeah, no, great. Thanks, Dan. I'll just add that in terms of like the resources we shared, the Climate Friendly Supermarkets website, those all live on climatefriendlysupermarkets.org. And there you can find the map, which will really help you kind of see if your local store is on the map, or walk you through how to check out what refrigerant they're using. And the scorecard kind of shows how they all stack up, at least the larger food retailers. But there's also recommendations for companies and on that website. So if you are chatting with someone, if you're engaging, that's a resource to direct folks to who may have decision-making power in different ways. So that's, yeah, that can be a good starting point if you're reaching out and trying to get some conversations going.
I think that's really helpful. And just one last question I really want to wrap up with to drive it home. You guys have obviously touched on a lot of different ways that people can get involved. You know, these conversations that you're having just at the one-on-one level. We of course highlighted the Kroger action in the chat. But I'm wondering, just as the takeaway, to remind people how they can get involved in this work, because there's a surprising amount between both EIA and Green America's work.
Well, stay tuned. I mean, we're, like I said, we'll keep pressuring Kroger's and other stores, frankly, but mostly concentrating on Kroger's until they make the right decisions. Social media, the one thing that we're concentrating on, especially with Kroger, because I've been monitoring this, is, and they're not the only one, but certainly Kroger, a lot of their conversations that they're having with their customers and their consumers is through Twitter. And so getting into those Twitter chats and just raising the issue about, hey, what are you doing about leaks? Hey, when are you going to switch out? Hey, when are you going to have a real policy? Having those conversations electronically. And then, like I said before, going into the stores and asking people, like, if you don't have a Kroger store, go to their website, you can figure out, because most likely they have a store in your area. It's just under a different name.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Definitely keep an eye on announcements from Green America and EIA. We have, as I've mentioned, a lot of resources for how to get involved in the supermarkets work. Our website also shows a lot more on our policy work and other investigations that we've done on the issue and also other issues. So a lot of great information to figure out how to get involved at your local level, community level, state level, all of that good stuff. So a lot of different ways to take action, and we will be sharing those as the new ones come up.
Yeah, look for a lot of activity in June for sure around the shareholder, and then yes, we have plans for after that as well, but more to come on that.
Amazing. Well, thank you both for all of your wonderful expertise and your skill in breaking down what can be a very difficult and dense topic into a nice little digestible pieces, and for continuously explaining not only what this issue is, but also how we can get involved, because everyone shops at a supermarket as far as I know. So this feels like a very pertinent issue and one that we all engage with on a daily basis. So thank you again. And thank you all for joining us. You can look out for our follow-up email within the next 24 hours. It'll include some of the links that you've seen in the chat here today, and give you a few reminders about the different ways that you can get involved in reducing HFC emissions in your own community. So thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your Thursdays, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for all you do.
Thanks everyone so much. Thanks, Tyler.
Thanks, Tyler.
Bye.